Hello, today I'm going to be discussing the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So a little outline of my presentation, I'm going to start with history of the Act and how it looks today, some driving forces behind the Act, some therapy-based coverage and how that works, implications that have come about since the Act was started, and a conclusion. So some history. As we know, children with disabilities were not always treated well, especially before the implementation of any Special Educations Act. They were seen as subhuman. They were not seen as deserving of proper education, especially an education that would cater to their specific needs. They were kind of seen of as having no potential, so it was kind of thought that why would you waste time trying to educate them when they clearly wouldn't be able to understand as well as the other kids. So they were treated very poorly, unfortunately, before the implementation of any Education Act. So before IDEA was created, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was created in 1975. And this kind of brought about the conversation that children with disabilities should definitely have proper education and should be able to try to learn in school, and teachers should be willing to teach them so they can be given the proper rights as the other children were given. So this was a great start for children with disabilities, but it wasn't until 2004 that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was created, and this added a lot more elements that are very important today. So one of the first very important elements are IEPs, which are individualized education plans, and these are plans that are set for each student with a disability. A committee will help build an education plan, as well as the parents and some staff members from the school, for the child about how they will go about receiving their education, how they will do it, whether that be one-on-one or in a setting with a bunch of other students, how long they'll receive certain therapies, which we'll get into later, and stuff of that sort. So their plans are individualized so that they can have the potential to learn properly. And then LREs are the least restrictive environments. So children with disabilities in schools are going to do their individualized education plans by way of least restrictive environment so that they are not set to a lower standard or given any less support or attention than the other students. So today we can see there are two different types of grants that school districts can receive to help fund their IDEA in their school. So the first type of grant is a formula grant, and this type of grant is awarded to states each year in order to support early interventions for infants, toddlers, preschool-aged kids, children, and youth with disabilities. So that goes to the states each year so they can help providing their services in the schools. But then there are also discretionary grants, which are awarded directly from the U.S. Department of Education through a competitive process. They're awarded to higher education institutions, state educational agencies, and other nonprofit organizations. So the schools, the grade schools, are the ones that will mostly be receiving formula grants, and they receive those each year. Also, a lot of changes have been made to classrooms, especially for students with physical disabilities. There are now, most schools are all accessible by a wheelchair, so that there are a lot of ramps that were created so that children in wheelchairs are able to come up ramps to come to classrooms, and elevators and things of that sort. Some other things that were changed in many schools, since some students are colorblind, the use of green and red ink is little less common, and the use of colors like blue and black are more common so that there's not that issue for the students. And one study showed that 6.9 million children have been helped since 1975. So that's a lot of children with disabilities being offered proper education and the ability to succeed. So that's great to see. So some driving forces behind IDEA, it's really all based on equality and opportunity. These kids should not be treated less than just because of their disabilities, and education should be a right for all students regardless of your ability. So giving children the ability to try and learn and be around their peers and be in the least restrictive environment is very important. Also, the individualized education plans are important because every student is different, especially those who have disabilities. So having this individual plan will help them learn in the best way possible for them. They're not set to the same standard as the other children who don't have disabilities. So it's a fair playing field in this way. So therapy-based coverage is a very big part of IDEA. Children who qualify are offered therapy during school hours. So the therapies are chosen, well, they're not chosen, the student must qualify for them, and the parent decides if they want their child to participate in the therapy that they qualify for. So it's not like a menu where the parents can just choose what therapy they want their children to do. It's more they must qualify for it, and that comes with the IEPs and with the whole committee that helps them create those. So each state has a committee that reviews the IEPs and decides how long the student will continue the IEP, in what setting, and for how long the student will receive therapy each day or each week that the committee decides. So therapy in the school kind of acts like a one-stop shop for families. Instead of having to take your child to physical therapy every week or every few days, they're able to receive it in school. So if a parent is caring for a lot of other children at home, they don't have to go out of their way to find time to bring this child to therapy. And also issues like transportation. A lot of parents only have access to public transportation, which is not always great to get to therapy appointments. So being able to receive it at home is a huge advantage to many families. A lot of the therapies in schools are free of cost through FAPE, which is free and appropriate public education. And this is made possible by the grants and the other funding that school districts receive. If children are covered by Medicaid or by private insurance, their parents might need to sign a consent waiver so that the school can bill the Medicaid or private insurance if necessary. So if a child is under Medicaid, the child's family should know that if the school has to charge their Medicaid, their future services of Medicaid will not have an impact because of this. So they're still free to receive future services, and this will have no impact on that. But if family is covered with private insurance, the family should check the insurance first to see if the school billing the insurance will have an effect on lifelong benefits later. So it just kind of depends on the situation. So there have been a lot of great implications from the law over the years, but there are some cons as well. So one of the cons is the issue of qualification, and this can kind of be broken down into a few different subsections. So a lot of parents and teachers and lawyers have discussed how much paperwork it takes to see if your child qualifies in the first place, which can be a whole process in itself because you need to follow the definition of child with a disability from the law itself to see if your child qualifies. And while that description is very lengthy and detailed, it's still ultimately up to those creating the IEP and the parents and the teachers to decide if this child qualifies or not. So the paperwork takes a lot of time. It's very strenuous. It's a lot of hard work and stress, and that's definitely hard on people that already are dealing with their child with a disability or their student with a disability. Paperwork's kind of the last thing they want to be dealing with, but it is necessary. Also figuring out if the child is adversely affected, so that the child must be adversely affected in school by their condition, by their disability, in order to qualify. So while there's a lot that discusses that in the law itself, again, it's somewhat subjective because you can say that a student is or is not adversely affected in their education by their disability, so that's an issue too. And then thirdly, not all disabilities are covered under IDEA. There are still children that struggle in school that are not covered by IDEA, so they cannot receive therapy in schools. This is not very common because there are 13 categories that IDEA covers, 13 disability categories, so it's very vast and wide. But it's true that there are still some that are not covered, and this can put an extra weight on the family of those children since they have to figure that out and help them get outside sources of therapy and other services. And then another issue is the decreased funding. So before 2004, local school districts were mandated to maintain the same funding level from one year to the next. But now, under the reauthorization of IDEA in 2004, districts are now allowed to reduce their local share up to 20% of the increase in their federal funding. So the districts are permitted to do this in any year where the federal funding exceeds $4.1 billion. So this decrease in funding can actually result in a decline in effort from school districts, which makes it harder for the children to receive proper services from their school. So it kind of is unfortunate that it depends on what school district you are, which can have implications on how many services you'll receive, at what cost, and so on and so forth. So in conclusion, there are definitely pros and cons to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It seems like there are more pros than cons just because of how many children it has helped and how the mind of society has kind of shifted to this more understanding viewpoint on children with disabilities and everyone with disabilities overall. And since every single child is different, especially those with disabilities, it's really hard to create a perfect law. So there's always going to be issues with most education laws. There's always going to be things that don't work for some people, but overall, children with disabilities definitely have been positively affected by this law, and their parents as well. And those are my references. Thanks for watching.